Pets are always a hot topic, which I think is why we've got so many registrants tonight, which is great to see. So quickly, the Parliament or the government view on pets. It's important to understand this because, as we all know, body corporate is very heavily regulated by government. So the government's view on pets and every other topic filters through into how the body corporate works. So the law changed in Queensland in 2022, so last year, and it made pets a right and not a privilege for tenants. So that was only a change that affected tenants and landlords, but it's an indication that the government views pets as something that people, should be allowed to have as a right, unless there's a really, really good reason for them not to have a pet. So that's quite a change to some past approaches, and it really shows that we're moving in the direction as a society that pets are a part of the family. And, I go to Bunnings on the weekend and there's dogs everywhere and, everyone seems happy with that. So that's just how the world is now. That pet right was already the case for owner-occupiers. So owner-occupiers always had a right to have a pet unless there was a strong and compelling reason for them not to. They had to go through an approval process and still do, but it's not a case of should we give this person the privilege of a pet. It's more the dealing with the mechanics of making that approval happen. And landlords now can't refuse pets in their own property. So this was that change the government made last year. Again, relates to rentals only, but they decided that pets can live in rental properties. Does not matter what the landlord's view about pets are. So they have to accept pets unless there's a specific reason that they should be refused, and that list of reasons is in the law. So it's very narrow and it doesn't allow landlords to refuse pets just because they don't like pets or they feel like it. So it really does set up this structure that most people can now have pets. So from a body corporate perspective and under your bylaws, which are the rules that govern each individual building, from 1990s to the 2010s, the question in the bylaws was, will our body corporate allow pets or not? If Matthew Savage applies for a pet, should he be allowed to have one, yes or no? Everybody had an opinion about that, and there were many arguments. We can all understand why that would have occurred. So the government stepped in after a very, very long time of arguments, and they said, yes, you will be allowing pets, and that's how they've done that through legislative change. In the 2020s, so this decade, the question is not will we allow pets or not, it's how are we managing pets as a part of daily life in the building. Pets are here to stay, what are we doing about it so that they don't have negative impacts on residents? So if pets are a right, why do you all see pet approval processes? So pet approval processes in Queensland are based on the bylaws, which are custom for each building. So every single building in the state has its own bylaws. They are not all the same. Some of them, obviously follow themes, but they are all individual. And most buildings have a bylaw that says something along the lines of, nobody can have a pet unless it is approved by the committee. That is why people have to ask for permission of the body corporate, and it's why you see so many committee votes about whether, some owner in some unit can have a pet. That committee decision process has to be disclosed to all owners, which means it takes a little while. It costs money because owners have to receive all this information by post. And it is time consuming for the committee, for us as the body corporate manager, and for the person who's, waiting on the answer before they go and buy their dog or adopt their pet, whatever it is. So that type of bylaw forces owners to apply, forces the committee to decide on each pet, and the committee can only say yes unless there's a strong reason for refusal. These are some acceptable reasons for refusal. So if an individual animal has a violence control order, so if you have a dog, you know that if it bites someone, council can tell you it's a dangerous dog and it has to be, muzzled when it's on a leash, and you've got to have a sign on your front gate, those sorts of things. That type of dog, the committee could probably refuse coming into an apartment building. If it's a banned dog breed in your local area, so different councils have different types of dogs they allow and don't allow. Some things are animals, but they're not pets. So as funny as these sound, if you want to have a pig or a donkey or a llama or a goat, the committee can generally refuse those because they're not a domestic pet, even though some people want to keep them as a pet. If the committee saw that there was more than a reasonable number, so if someone wanted to have 7 dogs and run a breeding centre out of their townhouse, they could say no to that. Or a commercial operation, doggy daycare, or if the owner refuses to have the animal vaccinated and microchipped and registered with the council. So those all sound pretty extreme. That's the level of extremity that is needed for a committee to say no to a pet. Usually most things below that really extreme standard means the committee still has to say yes. So the things that the committee can't rely on, it can't rely on the slippery slope argument where, you know, some members would say, look, if we say yes to this pet, next thing there'll be 150 dogs in our complex and that's too many. That's not a valid argument. It has to be based on the merits of the individual pet. And yes, if you've got 150 apartments, you may end up with 150 pets. That's just how it is, and that's not a reason to refuse individual applications. Committees aren't allowed to just have a preference that certain dogs, or usually it's dogs, don't live in apartments for health reasons, so that, you know, you'll often hear that dog is too big for an apartment. The RSPCA and local councils have some guidance about what are appropriate apartment dogs, and often big dogs, if they get exercised, are totally fine living in an apartment. Generally, it's way more important that the owner takes care of the dog rather than what type of dog it is. Or the assumed fear or perceived fear that dogs might bark and cause a nuisance in the future. If someone came to you and made an application and said, look, I want to get a dog, it's a terrible dog, it bites people and it barks all the time, you could probably say no to that, but you can't say no just because you think those things might happen or you have an assumption that they might happen. And I've been doing this a long time. No one has ever made an application for a pet and told the committee that it's a bad pet. Everybody says their pet is, you know, the best pet since sliced bread, and they always put it in a positive light, which is human nature. So last year, our office processed more than 500 pet approvals, which means 500 committee votes about pets in the buildings just that we manage, not in the state. And 99.3% of those were approved. So most of them just got instantly approved by the committee voting on those based on the name of the dog, what unit number it was, and what type of dog it was, or cat. So that's where we're at now. Pretty much all pets are going through anyway, even if they're going through the pet approval process. So it is possible to modernise the bylaws, make each building's own bylaws more suitable to recognise that situation. So rather than making everybody go through an approval process, which, you know, in our view probably isn't actually achieving anything, maybe eliminate the approval process from your bylaws and instead have some specific and clear conditions in your bylaws that say the building is pet friendly, residents may have, you know, a dog and a cat, as long as they follow these rules. And that way, the rules are up front, they're disclosed to every resident, they're disclosed to every potential tenant and potential buyer, and there's no ambiguity about who got what rules because they're just in the bylaws and everybody gets a copy of exactly the same bylaws within your building. Some buildings, if they've got a caretaker, instead of having a pet approval decision process, they say you need to go and tell the caretaker that you've got a dog, tell the caretaker the dog's name and take a picture of it, so that if that dog's wandering around in the hallway one day, someone can work out who it belongs to. And those conditions that you can apply in that bylaw are common sense. You know, that's where you deal with, it can't run around on the grassy area without a leash, it can't swim in the pool, it can't go in the gym, and it needs to be always wearing a leash and a collar with an identifying tag when it's outside. So those are some, rules. We can all sort of agree that most of those are sensible. You can put them in the bylaws, and then you don't need to decide on each pet individually. And that can be a big change. If you're in a big building, with 200 apartments, you'd be getting pet approvals every week, just because everybody's moving in and out all the time, and the prevalence of pets is only going up. So that shifts the focus from do we have a pet or not to what are we doing about the pets that we will be having, and how do we make sure that we enforce the rules against troublemakers properly. So in that, in the olden days, the bylaws were designed to keep most pets out and deter pet owners from moving into the building at all. And again, back in the 1980s, most Australians lived in houses and apartment living was unusual, whereas now it's really very much the norm, and townhouses are really a big thing. So a lot of people live in strata when they previously did not. Those bylaws, if you introduce them, should be simple, clear, and prominently displayed in your bylaws. So the more clear they are, the easier they are to enforce, and the more naturally self-enforcing they are. Because if you're a person who, wants to get a dog, you look at your bylaws, you already know the rules from day one, and you're not only being told about the rules after you've already gone down to the pet adoption centre and fallen in love with your pet. If you're in that position, it's hard to get talked out of it, or maybe try a different dog breed, or have to comply with some conditions if you're already in the mode of this is going ahead. So that time that's freed up from the committee, instead of deciding every single pet application, they can use that time on enforcing the bad pets. It's usually the bad pet owners, not the bad pets. That process of enforcing bylaws will cover a few times, but really the first steps of it are informal. So you can give people a first warning and a final warning, and then the next step is a bylaw breach notice, and then you go to conciliation or adjudication if unresolved. And that's where the Queensland government runs a conciliation/adjudication service, and they will decide who's right and who's wrong, and make orders that someone, starts complying with the bylaws, or whatever the case may be. They sort of intervene in that.